Jim Zogby, and welcome to Viewpoint. On Tuesday, the CIA released hundreds of previously classified documents known inside the agency as the Family Jewels. We're going to discuss them and the significance of them with a former CIA analyst, and then we'll talk to the co-author of a new strategy report on how the U.S. can reclaim stability in Iraq and the Middle East. But first, we're going to talk to Bruce Riedel. Bruce is a former Middle East expert for the CIA, having retired last year after a 30-year career with the agency. He served as senior advisor in the National Security Council under 3 presidents. He served the Pentagon as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense of Near East and South Asia and as senior advisor to NATO. He was a member of President Clinton's peace team at Camp David, Wye River, and Shepherdstown summits. Currently, he's a senior fellow with the Saban Center for Middle East Policy at the Brookings Institution, and author of a recent piece in Foreign Affairs on Al-Qaeda and how it is, in fact, expanding, not shrinking. I actually want to start there, if we can, because I've been noticing in the various presidential debates when the question is asked, are we safer than we are now? It's either become a rule of thumb for some or kind of a calculated political statement by others afraid of being called weak to say, yes, we are. And those who make the second judgment, the calculated one, say, but with some exceptions. Your argument begins rather straightforward. We're not.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I think Al-Qaeda today is more deadly than it was in September 2001. I think it's very ironic. I think every American on the 12th of September 2001, whether it was Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever ethnic group, all expected this president to do one thing: go relentlessly after the people who'd carried out this act of mass murder. 6 years later, Osama bin Laden, Ayman Zawahiri, Mullah Omar are still free. Worse than that, they're still plotting further attacks against the United States. And they're leading the insurgencies in Afghanistan and in Iraq, which every day take a terrible toll in human lives.
I want to talk about both of those 2 major theaters. You actually have a section in the article, you say they traded 1 for 2. But I want to talk about first the Afghanistan arena, because it's actually more than Afghanistan. It's Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Right.
And we've had a number of actually interesting discussions between Pakistanis and Afghanis. Afghanis blaming the Pakistanis, Pakistanis blaming Afghanistan, saying that they're not doing enough and we're the recipients of their problem. The Afghanis saying we can't because the Pakistanis are still involved in supporting these elements. Can you referee that? Is the fault on one side or the other? Where is Al-Qaeda and the Taliban now?
I don't think there's any doubt that Pakistan has turned a benign eye towards the resurgence of the Taliban. Immediately after September 11th, yes, they withdrew their support very dramatically, and that killed the Taliban as a military force. But starting in 2003, 2004, they began to allow the Taliban to rebuild on the Pakistani side of the border, especially in Baluchistan. In that environment, Al-Qaeda thrived, because while Pakistan's intelligence service went after some of the lower-hanging fruit in Al-Qaeda, they did nothing to the senior leadership. So I think the Afghans have it generally right that Pakistan has allowed the Taliban to revive. Now, on the other side, the Afghan government is very weak and has been from the beginning. It's been undersourced, underfunded, and undermanned. The war against the Taliban has been done on the cheap, and we've gotten the results.
Which is that Pakistan feels a security threat, and therefore they argue to some degree that the reason why they've had to make this pact with the devil is because they simply cannot afford to take this on absent a strong neighbor to the north.
Pakistan, I think, is the hardest part of the problem of what do we do about Al-Qaeda. We cannot pursue a policy of simply asking Pakistan to do more, to do more, to do more, without trying to address some of the underlying concerns that Pakistan has. For example, Kashmir. Pakistan got into the business of supporting jihad because of the Mujahideen war in Afghanistan. It stayed in it because of the war in Kashmir. Unless we begin to resolve the Kashmir issue, we're not going to resolve the underlying problems that make Pakistan a supporter of international jihadism.
Let's move over to the other arena, which is Iraq, which everyone today acknowledges, despite the sort of flubbed intelligence early on, that al-Qaeda was not in Iraq, but what clearly is now. And as we've seen recently from stories unfolding in North Africa, Algeria, Morocco in particular, and now in Lebanon, that there are Iraq Afghans as there were Afghan Arabs. There's trainees coming out of those places and now becoming a threat elsewhere. Is the problem merely one of copycat and a sort of a metastasization of a problem with this phenomena spreading, or is there an operational relationship between al-Qaeda in the Afghanistan arena and Iraq?
Oh, it's definitely both. The al-Qaeda core, which was really on death's door in 2002, was saved by the war in Iraq. We pulled our best special forces, our best intelligence people off the hunt and sent them to get ready to go into Iraq. And in Iraq, the al-Qaeda organization had a plan. We didn't have a plan for occupation. That's very clear from Jerry Bremer's book and George Tenet's book. Al-Qaeda had a plan. And their plan was to relentlessly go after the fault line of Iraqi society, the Sunni-Shia divide, and bomb the country into a civil war. There were clearly relationships between the al-Qaeda core leadership, Osama bin Laden, and their franchises, which was what I call it, in Iraq. And now we see both those two headquarters developing franchises elsewhere in the region. You mentioned Algeria, for example.
Where else?
Saudi Arabia. They have made the most significant violence in the kingdom in its history in the last several years from an al-Qaeda franchise operating there. They have franchises in Yemen. They're trying to develop one in Lebanon. They would love to develop one, if they could, in Gaza. What they would really like to do is have Hamas join the international jihadist movement. Until now, Hamas has held them at arm's length. That's why al-Qaeda is so critical of them. They're trying to develop them throughout Western Europe. They have a pretty significant franchise operation in the Pakistani community in the United Kingdom. They'd like to develop a similar one in the Algerian, Moroccan communities in France, Belgium, Spain, countries like that.
You wrote recently about a threat to France.
Right. They make no secret of it. They created a new al-Qaeda in the Maghreb last year on the 5th anniversary of September 11th. These anniversaries are a big deal for them. This was a major announcement. They were creating a new al-Qaeda operation in the Maghreb, and part of the purpose of that is to be able to attack French, Spanish, and other targets in Western Europe.
Now, you have some proposals about what to do about Afghanistan. One of them is to form a contact group. That is something similar to what the Iraq Study Group proposed for Iraq. It didn't happen in Iraq. The U.S. has a resistance against such efforts. It appears to be this administration does. What are the chances that one could see of this being recognized as a solution for Afghanistan?
I think it makes sense wherever. We did this in the Balkans, and it worked quite helpfully in order to try to bring about stability in Bosnia and then in Kosovo. It's just a natural. If you want the neighbors to be helpful, you got to reach out to them. We don't do that in Iraq because of Iran, and the same reason in Afghanistan. We don't want to bring the Iranians in.
Well, we had extraordinary cooperation with Iran early on.
That's right.
And that fell apart.
That fell apart because we didn't want to pursue it anymore, not because the Iranians didn't want to pursue it
because we didn't want to pay the price that Iran wanted, we didn't find Iran's cooperation enough, or we simply got diverted?
I think it's more an ideological aversion on this part of this administration.
Let me get the callers out there into the discussion. If you want, if you're calling from overseas, it's 001-202-842-5056. If you're calling from here in the U.S., it's 1-800-528-2090. We're talking about al-Qaeda, stronger now than it was before, and what can be done to confront this problem throughout the Middle East and elsewhere as it grows. One of the suggestions you propose is a war of ideas, which is actually more than a war of ideas. It's beginning to address unmet needs,
Right.
one of which, of course, is the Arab-Israeli conflict. I want to put that on the side for a minute and talk about another, Iraq.